September 1st, 1999.
What is not covered in the arson report is the presence of the government's own pyrotechnic devices at the points of origin of the fire. This flashbang device, for example, was found in the rubble of the dining room.
A new film, new revelations that the FBI withheld key information about the storming of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco.
What else don't we know about, knowing that these officials have been lying to us for 6 years?
Late today at FBI headquarters, federal marshals seized new evidence in the case.
I think they need an outside investigation.
Tonight, Waco, the case that just won't go away.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
I remember interviewing Attorney General Janet Reno just after the disastrous fire at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco. There were 80 dead, among them 25 children. Ms. Reno said that night that she accepted full responsibility for the FBI's actions. She got a lot of credit for that. I asked her whether she had considered following the example of Japanese or European officials who, in the wake of a scandal or disaster, often tender their resignations. She said no, and I took a lot of flack for asking the question. Still, it struck me then, as it does now, that accepting responsibility without consequences is essentially meaningless. In the light of new evidence that the FBI lied to the Attorney General on at least one key piece of information, where does responsibility lie, and who, if anyone, will suffer the consequences? ABC News has learned that federal marshals today took control of tapes at FBI headquarters on which FBI hostage negotiators can be heard discussing the use of pyrotechnic tear gas grenades the very morning of the deadly fire. Attorney General Reno testified before Congress that such grenades were never used. Justice Department officials are saying today that General Reno wants an outside investigator to look into what really happened. In the meantime, the credibility of the FBI, which probably did tell the truth about most of what happened, that credibility is badly damaged, while the credibility of conspiracy theorists who tend to be wrong about most of what they've spun together about Waco, their credibility is newly enhanced. It is on those two fronts that the greatest damage has been done. Here's Nightline correspondent Chris Bury.
The FBI anticipated the question even as the flames consumed the Branch Davidian compound known as Mount Carmel. Could its own firing of tear gas have contributed in any way to the deadly debacle at Waco?
No pyrotechnics were used at any time.
That very day, the Bureau's senior spokesman on the scene volunteered his solemn word that the tear gas was safe and non-flammable.
The gas used was non-pyrotechnic CS gas, which does not cause a spark or flame. Also, the delivery system utilized is also non-pyrotechnic.
That mantra appeared again in the final Justice Department review. Quote, the gas delivery systems the FBI used were completely non-incendiary. In sworn testimony before Congress, the Attorney General who had authorized the tear gassing was adamant.
I wanted and received assurances that the gas and its means of use were not pyrotechnic.
This is a U.S. military Mark 651 CS projectile recovered in the aftermath of the Mount Carmel fire. It is pyrotechnic and has a burning time of 25 to 30 seconds.
So when a documentary filmmaker sympathetic to the Davidians unearthed evidence made public in July that at least 2 pyrotechnic tear gas canisters, including this one, had been fired by the FBI, the trustworthiness of the Bureau and the Attorney General was suddenly on the line.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco. At this time, all available indications are that the devices were not directed at the main wooden compound, were discharged several hours before the fire started, and were not the cause of the fire.
I was shocked because the plan that was submitted all the way from the lowest levels up to the Attorney General said that no pyrotechnic devices would be introduced to the compound. We were very much concerned that a fire might be started by the FBI if a pyrotechnic device.
A law enforcement source says FBI Director Louis Freeh was, quote, off the charts angry when the two audio tapes were found earlier this week at the hostage rescue team headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. But senior officials at the Justice Department are also furious that the FBI did not tell them about the tapes until this afternoon. This is Chris Bury for Nightline in Washington.
In a moment, the FBI's chief hostage negotiator at Waco and an attorney who was told by the FBI that no audio recordings existed of radio traffic that fateful day in 1993.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Lexus.
Joining us now live from Austin, Texas, Byron Sage, the retired FBI hostage negotiator who issued the final warning to the Branch Davidians that CS gas would be fired into their compound. And joining us live from Tucson, Arizona, attorney David Hardy, who sued the FBI and the ATF for evidence in the Waco case. And what were you told when you, did you make a specific request for any audio tapes or any sound recordings?
Oh, yes. We made a request for audio tapes made on April 19th, and the FBI, an agent, head of their litigation unit, filed a sworn statement in front of Judge Marquez here, which reads, and I quote, on July 1997, another agent contacted special agent in charge of the FBI's hostage rescue team and was advised that, to his knowledge, no such audio recordings were made on April 19th.
Now, you know, you're an attorney. You know that when somebody says to his knowledge, that's one of those weasel phrases that mean it could be, but I don't know about it.
Well, they also go...
Did you ever pursue it any further?
No, that was as far as we got, but they also in the same affidavit say they searched 27 files of materials and found no records of it, and that they contacted a special agent assigned to the tactical operations and another one assigned to tactical operations, and they indicated that no such recordings were made.
Mr. Sage, you were there during the entire, well, during 51 days. You were there on April 19th?
Yes, sir.
Do you know who those two hostage, I mean, you were a hostage negotiator, right? You were in charge of the hostage negotiations.
I was one of many, yes, sir.
Do you know who the two hostage negotiators are whose voices have now been found on that infrared tape?
It's my understanding that they were actually members of the hostage negotiation, hostage rescue team, HRT. They were not negotiators on the tape.
And to whom would they have been reporting?
The audio tape in question was recorded by an aircraft that was orbiting above the crisis site and taking the FLIR tape. The difference with this tape is it also has an audio tape as part of it. They were talking amongst the tactical units that were out there attempting to coordinate movement.
Who would have been able to hear them?
I was not in that loop. The negotiation aspect was not, but this tactical net, as it's referred to, would have been monitored at the command post, would have been monitored, I would believe, all the way up to and possibly the Washington, D.C. area.
So theoretically, there were people here at FBI headquarters in Washington listening to that tape on which two agents are talking about the use of pyrotechnic grenades.
I'm not absolutely certain of the extent of the upleak, but I can tell you that the audio tapes were obviously recorded to memorialize them for accuracy and so forth, and they would have been uplinked into the on-site command structure at Waco. And most of this information, because of the magnitude of the undertaking, the tear gas operation, would have been, if not live to FBI headquarters, would have been relayed in near real time.
Now, given the number of questions that were raised about this particular issue, beginning with the press conference that took place that same day, the following morning, going on to the congressional investigation, wouldn't you think that somebody at FBI headquarters would have found these tapes?
Clearly, yes. And I think that it's an embarrassment that they were not brought forward until this particular time. As I understand it, the the contents of the box that these tapes were located in had been reviewed several times, both internally by the FBI and by Department of Justice in preparation for the criminal prosecution in San Antonio in February of 1994. The actual review, as I understand it, was done in approximately November or December.
Now, you've just heard Mr. Hardy say that he filed a Freedom of Information Act request for any tapes that might exist, and was told that no tapes existed. Now, as I noted, the agent who gave the response said, to the best of his knowledge.
Right.
When a FOIA request like that comes in, do you know from personal experience how much of an effort the FBI makes to see whether indeed such tapes exist?
Extensive, and I can say that as a matter of fact because I've been involved in a number of them. As far as trying to fully identify each and every piece of information that can and should be produced. It should have been exhausted, it should have been extensive, and it should have been complete. This, again, is yet another difficult situation to try to explain, and there is no excuse for it. If the Bureau is going to end up, if the FBI is going to end up taking a hit, if you will, as far as credibility and so forth, then that should be the case. But what needs to be recognized is that as these items were identified, they were immediately brought forward and provided. They were not tried to, there was no effort to suppress them. There was no effort to paint it anywhere other than the way it actually is.
Well, let me take mild issue with that, but I'll do that after a break. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with our guests in a moment. And we're back live once again with former FBI negotiator Byron Sage and with attorney David Hardy. Mr. Hardy, you told me that you had filed a Freedom of Information Act request for any tapes that the FBI might have, and you said at the beginning of this program they told you they didn't have any. But apparently there did come a time when you were given some tapes. What were they?
Well, yes, they said they had no audio tapes, but I believe Byron just said something to the effect that the audio is on the soundtrack of the infrared tape. Well, they did allow they had the infrared tapes, and they produced those for me and stated under oath in this affidavit that they were first-generation unedited copies. The copies they produced for me have no soundtrack. Somebody, in fact, edited those tapes before they released them.
Mr. Sage, do you have any explanation for that?
What I can tell you is that to the best of my knowledge, and that isn't meant as an escape clause or anything else, that the FLIR tape that has been produced here was the initial tape that was produced during the early stages of the raid, from approximately 6 in the morning until approximately 8 o'clock during the initial phases of the tear gas operation. If subsequent tapes did not have the audio track, I can't speak to that authoritatively.
No, but I mean, apparently these are the tapes that were today handed over from the FBI to federal marshals, which do have audio on.
That's correct. That's correct.
Are we not here, Mr. Hardy, talking about the same tapes?
Yes, and apparently it was edited out, but I believe Mr. Sage just said he handed over the tapes beginning at 6 a.m. We have a third case of perjury here in Tucson because the same FBI agent swore to the court that the earliest FLIR videotape recorded April 19th occurred at approximately 10:42 a.m. They swore they have nothing before 10:42 a.m. in this affidavit. We've just been told that it goes back to 6 a.m.
Mr. Sage?
Yes, accurate statement. Perjury, no. It was based on the best information that we had at the time. The first I heard about this tape that was initiated at 6 o'clock was this afternoon, or this evening, frankly, when I called back to FBI headquarters to get the best information possible to present in an honest and candid fashion. At that point in time is when I was advised of the identification of this tape that had been stored down at the hostage rescue team at Quantico, Virginia. This tape was presented, or apparently identified, provided to FBI headquarters, and immediately turned over as to the potential of evidence that it represents.
You were saying just before the break, Mr. Sage, that the FBI has indeed made whatever information it has available as soon as it has it. But with regard to those pyrotechnic devices, isn't it the fact that the FBI didn't say a word about those until this film was produced, with documentary evidence that such devices had indeed been fired at the concrete bunker. It wasn't the FBI that came up with that information.
That's partially true. The information regarding these particular shots having been fired was pursued aggressively, as I understand it. What was determined was that the two devices in question were not directed at the wooden structure. That's a critical issue that needs to be brought forward. They were directed towards this construction pit situated approximately 50 to 75 yards north of the wooden compound. So, not to be splitting hairs here, because I think that that's the wrong approach. You tell the truth the way it is and let the American public assess it as it is. The facts of the matter are that if the question today was posed, was there a pyrotechnic or otherwise incendiary device directed towards the wooden structure, the answer is still no.
But if the question, as it was posed at the press conference, and we're down to our last few seconds, was, were any pyrotechnic devices fired? And that indeed was the question, and the answer was no, then that was an inaccurate answer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and I think it was answered in the context of the compound without taking into account devices that were addressed towards this northern facility.
All right, Mr. Sage, I'm afraid that's all the time we got this evening. Thank you. Thank Mr. Hardy for being here also. In a moment, we'll have a quick preview of tomorrow's Nightline in primetime.
56.
U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno is fuming. She is ordering a new investigation of the siege at Waco, all because a Tucson attorney turned up new information embarrassing to the FBI and the Attorney General. Sal Chiata has more.
The fire destroyed the Branch Davidian compound, killing 80 adults inside and nearly 24 children. A congressional investigation blamed the compound occupants for setting the fire. But the FBI now admits firing tear gas canisters, which could have set a fire. David Hardy's a Tucson attorney fighting the government over documents on Waco. Hardy and a documentary film producer found the new information angering the Attorney General.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco.
I don't think she knew what was going on. I think she's truthful when she says she had no idea of any of this stuff. Now we're starting to find. We found two major things off the top. I think it'll get bigger from here.
Federal Judge Alfredo Marquez gave Hardy and his associate $32,000 to pay him back for all the work that Hardy has done fighting the government under the Freedom of Information Act.
And Judge Marquez, I think quite properly, tagged the government with attorney's fees. I believe it's the second highest reported award in the history of the statute, which has been around for 25 years.
Newly released government documents show military explosives experts were brought in to advise federal police agency. Hardy wants to know why.
One of the reasons I became interested in this and was thinking about writing a book on it is that I've been upset at the militarization of law enforcement, in particular at the federal level.
Hardy says more questions need to be answered about Waco. He believes federal agents still have a room full of evidence about Waco that has not been released. Sal Chiata, KGUN 9 News.
The FBI now admits using the pyrotechnic tear gas canisters, but says agents could not have started the fire at Waco because the canisters were only fired at a concrete bunker. The Attorney General says she welcomes a congressional investigation.